Hello, and a warm welcome to you and your beautiful soul. Whether you're just stumbling across the channel or you are a follower from the very beginning, it makes me so happy to see that you're here. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, please pause this one and catch up in the series so that I don't confuse you with the breakdown of step 1. I hope that you are all well rested, because you are going to need it for what we're diving into today. It's going to be very complex and very detailed. Few things before we start diving into it. One of the things that you will need to know for the relevance and understanding of what I'm going to be referring to is what a cast net is. And if you have no clue what that is, you're in luck, because I just so have one on hand for demonstration purposes. See, I come from a commercial fisherman background and upbringing, so a lot of my euphemisms in relations to reality and how it correlates in my mind will probably be made with fishing gear or fishing scenarios, or even problem solving that I've learned through the commercial fishing life. Before we actually dive into breaking it down, I do need to also give you a quick background on my mother. I didn't really introduce much of her during the prelude, so for this episode and for the remaining episodes, you're really going to have to understand where I'm coming from with who my mother is, what she's been through, and what she's taught me, and how that relates to my own self-growth and how it can help you. Without understanding the context, it can be misunderstood or misrepresented, and I don't want that to happen. In any of this that I am putting out there is ever unclear to you, please reach out to me. My email address is listed on all of my platforms, but in case you need it, I'll go ahead and insert it right here. If you think that any of what I am putting out there is a misrepresentation, if you're confused on it and you need me to further explain or elaborate, please do not hesitate to send me an email. I will definitely get back to you. So let's start off with our daily affirmation, which is kind of ironic for our affirmation today, because it does really relate to this step 1 process. I look for the beauty and wonder of life. And honestly, isn't that what we do? Isn't that what we look for? We try to find the beauty of our lives. We try to figure out and find out how to live and not just survive, how to prosper and not just exist. So now it's time for those who don't know what a cast net is or know what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and show you, right? So this is actually our own 6-foot cast net. And so you have the rope that you use to hold it around your wrist. You have the top of it, you have the netting, and then you have the weights at the bottom. So now that you know what a cast net looks like, I'm gonna go ahead and jump into the background of my mom. So as I mentioned in the prelude, I really didn't mention her much. I did mention my grandmother, and my grandmother is actually my mother's mother. So my mother's name is Jeannie. She is even more complex and diverse than I am, believe that or not. So a recap of her timeline: she had me at a young age. Shortly after she had me, I was about 2 months old. She got into a really, really bad car crash. It crushed one complete side of her skull, which left her brain swelling outside of her skull region, and so they actually had to reconstruct one side of her skull with metal plates. But with this happening and her experiencing this head injury, we think that she was actually able to tap into a more diverse way of thinking, because she had to remap and relearn how to use her brain, and that's the best way I can even start to describe that. Later on in the series, I'm hoping to actually do a whole episode where she and I collaborate on everything and maybe even clear up some points of views that I have clouded. You know, and it's just to give you all another perspective from her point of view, because she's where all of this originated. she is the reason for the season, right? And she really didn't know how to explain to me or give me the tools to understand how we think or why we do what we do, or even how to relate to normal life while I was growing up. So all of my life, I've struggled with my hasty yet indecisive decisions, no matter what the decision would be. Big or small, no matter what the size of the consequence was. If I woke up with that quote-unquote personality that morning, anything and everything I would do that day would be hasty, indecisive, or reckless. You know, my mother would often ask me whenever I would do these things that were hasty or dumb, as she defined them, she would always ask me how I could have thought, quote unquote, half past my ass. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that means, she doesn't understand how I could think about the situation and still carry through with my dumbass actions, knowing the consequences that were going to happen. So, you know, she really did always think that I was just lying and stating that I did think it through. But y'all, honestly, I thought it through so thoroughly that I would weigh the consequences depending on what mood my mother was in at that time. If she had woken up that morning mad at the world, or if she had woken up and chose to pretend to be as chipper as she could that day. Because let's face it, we all have days where we fake it till we make it. And for my poor mother, there were so many days, way too many to count, that she faked it till she made it. Because she didn't know how to get past and overcome and understand and love herself. It is through her, all of her lessons and life explorations and all of her downsides that resulted in failures, all of it, that I was able to observe, watch, and learn. And in my mid to late 20s, she and I have really started to dive deep and explore and actually collaborate on how to do this. But back to what I was saying, you know, the way my mind works. I had thought so immensely and thoroughly within mere seconds as a child. And it was so many thoughts all happening at the same time, and with a lack of understanding on how to explain it, my answer would always fall short, and it would be simple. And I'd just say, but I did think it through, Mom. Or, my mom's favorite, I know. For much of my life, I honestly believed that I did have multiple personality disorder. Not so much as living in a split reality. However, more so, whatever environment I'd be surrounded in would cause or depict, more or less, the personality I needed to survive. I'll elaborate on that further and deeper in another episode of this series. But, you know, scientifically, it is linked. ADHD is scientifically mapped and linked back to the Neanderthal DNA. And I don't know if you've ever taken a 23andMe test, but they actually tell you what your percentage of the Neanderthal DNA. Mine's pretty high, which is a relative factor. And it really put things into perspective for me, because that's whenever I really started diving in to understanding why I'm always on a fight or flight response. Like, why is that my go-to? Why is that my first thought of carrying out any of my actions? It's always a fight or flight response. And it wasn't until I dove real deep into that and I really started understanding how much the Neanderthal DNA was actually linked to ADHD that I started to actually understand and get that we're genetically hardwired and absolutely connected with the Neanderthal fight or flight first response. It was only then that I was able to actually start developing on how to dissect it and how to fix it and how to evolve it to live in our world that we live in today, in society today. And it's also not just the fight or flight response. In Neanderthal DNA genetic mapping, there was a high prevalence of a gene that causes the brain to overanalyze every single situation for all possible scenarios for survival, right? And also there is a actual process that happens, especially whenever you're more so connected to the Neanderthal DNA, which is also something that happens often to me on a daily basis with ADHD. So you know how whenever you have a thought and then it's gone, it's just gone. You know what it was, but it's just gone. It's actually a process, and it's a downfall from evolving from the Neanderthal culture. It actually is a survival technique that was learned and picked up and genetically hardwired into us, because if you were going through, the desert or wherever you're at, right, being a caveman, you're going to get breakfast. Well, here comes the damn big T-Rex or whatever was going over there. Well, you have to stop your focus, and you have to immediately be redirected, right? Because there's more prevalent danger that you have to deal with, right? That exact instance of what happens is what evolved into us absolutely losing our train of thought. It actually does get stuck in the bottom part of the brain. And that's why later, whenever our brain is relaxing or not super focused on something, that's why we can then regenerate and remember that thought. Because it actually gets caught up in this little round part at the bottom of your brain where your thoughts actually come out of, right? It gets caught there. That's why we lose our train of thought, because it was a survival technique and mechanism from our Neanderthal DNA genes. So there's nothing wrong with us. It's just that we come from the original genetics. And we're still pretty hardwired that way. That's okay. Because we are going to work through it all, and we are going to evolve and learn how to live in modern day society and thrive, right? It's what we're here for. It doesn't have to be a disease or a downfall at all. Just got to learn how to use it. Just like our ancestors did. Cavemen didn't know exactly how to use their damn brain. They had to figure it out, right? This is what we're doing. Because the assumption that all of us make that we know the way is wrong. It's wrong. We have to constantly learn each and every day. We have to evolve each and every day. We don't know everything. You should not trust your brain at this moment in time or at this point to know everything on how to react or how to do it or what to choose to do, because it's not up to date yet. You haven't remapped it yet, right? And that's what we're gonna do. So anyway, back to what I was saying, and y'all, I'm really sorry for jumping around on these topics here, but I'm having a hard time because I'm so excited and there's so much that I want to tell y'all. So I promise I will try to get better about the structure of the jumping. And of course, I do have ADHD, and it's what my brain does, especially whenever I get excited or passionate about something. But thinking with our brain as a child, especially back whenever I was young and in school, I'm almost 30, is whenever ADHD diagnoses really started taking the forefront in schools. That's whenever teachers really started to push the get on medicine forefront, stating that you're a disturbance in the class. Back before that era, nobody even took a sight to ADHD. It was that you were a bad kid, or you weren't even paying attention in class, or you just didn't care. I think that in my era, it was a huge downfall to modern medicine and to the study and growth of mental health. You know, ADHD was treated from a standpoint of being seen as a nuisance and the need to contain it. I firmly believe that if it would have been actually explored and understood and learned, that there wouldn't be as many medically dependent people out there with ADHD as an adult now. Because it really hindered my learning of how to function in society, in reality, in the real world, and how to make myself engage in the things that are not an interesting topic to me. It's very backwards how our mind works, but that's okay because that's fixable. If it's hard and challenging, y'all, I'm so zoned in and ready to go. I'm freaking hyper-focused. But if it's simple, oh my God, I'm taking a nap. Like, this is exhausting, all right? With the medication thrown at our era, I never really learned how to make myself buckle down and pay attention, even though I was bored. I didn't. Nobody taught me that. I took medicine and it suppressed my ADHD to the fact that I could function and pay attention even though I was bored. Now, I rely on this medication in my adult life, and it makes me feel very vulnerable. I don't know if it does that for y'all or not, but it definitely does make me feel vulnerable. It makes me feel like I'm less than, because I have to medicate myself to be able to actually construct a thought for something that I'm not interested in. And that's something that I've always struggled with. That is why it is my goal. It is my hope to explain how, as an adult, after being medically crippled in my era with the medication and not learning all of these things as a child, it is my hope that I can explain how to move past those things as an adult. So let's start jumping into it, shall we? For a few quick reference points, I want to go ahead and point out that in my prelude, I spoke about how other people see you, which is what everybody else calls your personality, right? Okay, so keep that in mind and keep that aspect of it in mind, right? Because what I'm going to dive into today, you're going to need to remember that the end goal is your personality. Dissecting it, understanding it, and being able to understand why other people perceive you in the manner that they do. All right, y'all. So let's start breaking down the cast net method. Whenever you're looking at a cast net and you're observing it, right? You have your throw rope, which is what this is, right? With a little loop on the end, that's what you put your wrist in. So you have your throw rope, which is what goes around your wrist, so you don't lose the cast net and you can pull it back in. After that, or at the bottom of the throw rope, right, you have what we're going to call the throat of the cast net. So this is what we're going to call the throat, okay? And this is actually where all of the webbing of the cast net comes together at a fine point to the top of the cast net. This fine point is movable up and down, right? So that's what we're referring to your personality as, and it's movable. For the sections of the webbing, okay? See these webbings? Think of those as your thoughts. So this is all of your thoughts, right? All of them happening at one time. And think of the throat of the cast net as your personality. The string can be related to or seen as everybody else does in society, right? So like everybody else in society looks at us like this, right? All they see is the end result. They don't see anything on the inside or what's actually funneling us to do anything. So each run of this webbing, which is the complete start from the cast net all the way down the net to the bottom of the net where the weights are. So from this point, right, from right here, you have those straight runs that come down, right? And from there, all the way down to these weights, right? Each one of these straight lines down represents one of your thoughts. This in its entirety is what makes up the conclusion and decision on how you choose to behave, react, and what you choose to do. So each run is a single thought. Remember that. And at the bottom of the cast net is what we're going to call the mouth of the cast net. I call it the mouth because it opens up real wide, and I've always been told I have a big, open, wide mouth. So, here we are. So, whenever you cast the net, right? Whenever you throw it out into the water, you make sure that your technique is good enough so you don't taco fold it and you don't get anything. You have to throw this cast net gracefully to where it spreads out completely level like a big flat spider web. Right? That's your end goal. So in relation, your end goal is to be more perceived for who you actually want to be and need to be than the way that society sees us from the very point of us, right? But anyway, once it goes into the water, the weights come together, go around the fish, and then you pull it up. And as you pull it up, it collapses around the fish and it cradles them, making it possible for you to pull them into the boat. So then you can empty it and harvest the fish.
In your basket.
Right? So I'm explaining all of this part of it because once again, it is relevant for you to understand exactly how to correlate this and how it's easier to see and understand this with the visual aspect of it. So we've gone over the fact that your personality is the throat, okay? It's your personality. The string before the throat of the cast net is society. So then you have your personality, the throat of the cast net. Then you have all of the straight runs that go from the throat of the cast net down to the weights. Each one of these represents a thought. And I'm only reiterating this to recap so you can stay on track. After you understand that, then you can move on to the next level of understanding your thoughts and how they actually correlate. You know enough about the cast net. You know that each of the straight runs from the throat down to the weights of the cast net are all interconnected. So, see, it's all interconnected, right? You have the straight runs going down, but then you have these diagonal runs that cut across, okay? So, these lines, these connections, these diagonal connections, strings, whatever we're going to refer to it as, right? You can refer to it as whatever you need to for it to stick in your brain for you to understand it. These represent, and I hope I'm not going to lose you here, but bear with me. These diagonal connections represent what our brains do whenever we tunnel. By that, I mean whenever you start with one single word and you somehow pop up with a whole random side thought, right? How many times do we get told, oh, that was random? But in our head, it's definitely not random. It's all related. We got there somehow, right? It's called tunneling. It's whenever you have that initial thought and then your brain pretty much goes underground and connects it and relates to 50 other things at the same time, and somehow or another you pop up, like you're tunneling underground with a random thought. So here's the thing, we're all different. So I'll try to break it down the best I can to help you understand how many thought processes I have going on. In hopes this will guide you to start to learn how to navigate what thoughts you actually want to carry out and what thoughts you don't want to carry out. What my thought process looks like to me is, and y'all, look, I'm sorry about the background noise. my kids have kids sleeping over, and they are currently in the kitchen eating supper and acting a fool. And, you know, it's Christmas break, New Year's break, so being lenient. Going forward, after they go back to school, I will be filming and doing the cast whenever they're in school, so there won't be any background noise to be had. So, you know, you just got to get through it with me, right? So, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and try to break down the best I can to help you understand how many thought processes I have going on, in hopes this will guide you to start to learn how to navigate what thoughts you want to carry out and what thoughts you don't want to carry out. So what my thought process looks like to me, and the best way that I have figured out how to explain it to the neurotypical, is imagine a Sam's store, right? And for those of you that don't know what a Sam's is, a Costco or any of the big bulk stores, right? So a big Sam's store, but it's empty. There's no merchandise in it. It's completely empty. There's not even shelves. And you have this old lady sitting in the middle of this building, right? In a wooden rocking chair, and she's got her knitting needles. Keep in mind, I said that this big Sam's warehouse building was empty. But to represent each one of my thoughts, I have at a given moment, each one of my thoughts is represented by a big ball of yarn. And this old lady, she is currently sitting in the middle of the empty warehouse, and she's ready to go ahead and knit a 150 multicolored blanket, right? So the rest of the square footage of this warehouse is filled, but not stacked, just filled, but filled thoroughly with different colors of yarn. Each ball of yarn represents each one of my thoughts that happens all at once, all at the same time. So with medication, while I'm on my ADHD medication, right, she can sit in the middle in her rocking chair, be completely serene, and knit this damn blanket, and it's perfect. I mean, all of the thoughts, all of the strings just knit together perfectly. It all just meshes together. It blends well, and the end result is just flawless. It's perfect, which is what represents my thought process on my medication. Now, off of my medication, because I didn't learn growing up how to structure all of these thoughts that happen at one time, because I depended on my medication. The best way to explain this, and y'all, I'm serious, stay with me here, okay? The old lady has now consumed a illegal substance that is a stimulant, okay? AKA she's on meth, right? And after she's consumed this substance, she just starts pulling or unwinding every single line of yarn. So all of the colors of all of these balls of yarn, she's just pulling them to her, right? So now she's got all of this unballed yarn. And remember, each ball of yarn represents a single thought that's happening in my mind, and it's all happening at the same time, at once. So off of my medication, she's sitting in the middle of all of this yarn, and it's one big tangled up mess. So my thoughts can't even form a conclusion to make a decision off of my medication, or at least it couldn't. I have learned how to cope more so now. However, used to, I could not. I could not come up with a concluding thought. It just wouldn't happen. I tried, and I felt really stupid and just not worth the oxygen that I would breathe, because I mean, what the hell is wrong with me? Like, I should be able to function and conclude and come to a decision on something simple, right? Now, in a complex situation, for some reason, while my brain's under pressure, it functions just fine off my medication, which is what a lot of you are going to relate to. Hopefully understanding why you procrastinate and wait and putting yourself into the most pressuring situations, right? It's because under pressure, your brain is hardwired to function at full capacity. And whenever you have too much time in your hands, your brain's just like, what's into it later? Quickly reverting back to my earlier reference. That is the way of how cavemen survived, existed, and lived, because they were always under pressure. It was always an intense situation. They didn't know if they were going to get eaten by going out to find breakfast. It was always a pressurized environment. And that's what the basic genetic fundamentals are for the human brain. So there's nothing really wrong with us. It's just that our brains are still hardwired that way, and we did not adapt and evolve, and we are still genetically in tune with our Neanderthal behaviors and ways. So let's do a quick recap before moving on to the next section. So, we have our cast net, right? We have our string, our throw rope, okay? Then we have the throat of the cast net, and that represents your personality and how it's perceived to society, right? Every straight run from the throat of the cast net down to the weights is one single thought process. And all of the diagonal webbing that connects each run to each other is your brain tunneling and correlating each one of these thoughts, okay? Starting with a visual representation, I'm hoping to help you understand exactly what I mean by unlocking the skill of being able to see something from all of the angles. If you look at the way we just viewed this cast net, or how your thoughts are, if you take the cast net and you turn it around, you'll actually see it from a different angle. So instead of looking at it like this and looking down on it, we need to take it and completely turn it upside down, right? Let's make it backwards. Let's make it work in our brains. So we're gonna go ahead and take it. We're gonna bring it over. We're gonna bring the mouth up, right? So then the mouth folds over, right? Now you're able to look at it from the inside out instead of looking down on it from the outside in. So this all represents what your personality is and how it is seen, right? So if you take it and look at it from the other point of view, like I'm holding it now, you're no longer looking from the outside in. You're looking from the inside out. So now we're able to actually dig deep and start figuring out how to fix these negative breaks in our thoughts, right? Sorry, y'all, I'm thirsty. See, we weren't taught that you don't have to see this only from the normal neurotypical viewpoint. Our brains are hardwired to overanalyze everything. So why not use it to the best of our ability, right? So let's go ahead and overanalyze it. Let's break it down. So at the bottom of the cast net, you have your weights, right? These beautiful things right here. So we're going to refer to these weights as your basic characteristics of the way that you were brought up, right? So this right here represents what you embedded within yourself growing up, right? It's what makes you have the thoughts that you have, okay? So those are the way that you were brought up, okay? And these are the things that are going to stick with you in your core. Those are things that you really, well, I'm not going to say that you can't, but I have yet to figure out how to dissect those and reiterate and reverb them. But I guess we'll all learn together, okay? So these are also the things that you ultimately lean on to make your decisions, either subconsciously or consciously, okay? The weights are really, really important. And if you feel the need to get the weights reference further broken down, I can definitely do my best to elaborate on that. However, like I said, I still have yet myself to figure out how to dissect and reconstruct that. So we can possibly collaborate and learn together. I'm definitely open to that. But if you do feel that need, definitely reach out to me at the email listed throughout this episode, throughout our podcast, throughout our series. I would love to collaborate and learn and listen and analyze it. So, okay, looking at it, flipped from the mouth of the cast net, looking from the inside out, each one of these straight runs, okay? So, from the mouth, each one of these straight runs, right? So you have it like this, okay? Each one of these straight runs, okay, is representing each one of your single thought processes that happens at the same time. There's a lot of straight runs in this cast net, right? So these diagonal runs link and or connect, right? So looking at it, you have your straight runs, and then you have your diagonals, right? So these diagonal runs link and or connect each straight run together, making a web, which makes your complete thought process, right? The diagonal connection and or link is what I refer to as tunneling, okay? So this right here is whenever your brain goes underneath and connects it to something else that's going on in your thoughts, right? Here's the problem though, is that our brain automatically tunnels. Doesn't have to be told to do it, it just does it. Whereas it is my strong belief, now I do not have scientific evidence to back this up, however, it is just my lifelong observation and trying to really understand and intermingle with the neurotypical, right? I honestly do not believe that a neurotypical brain tunnels whatsoever, which is why I think that it's a common misunderstanding of why somebody in society that's normal looks at us and is like, well, that was random, you know, how'd you come up with that? Because I don't think they tunnel. But during tunneling, especially if you have a negative experience, or if you don't love yourself enough, or if you feel unworthy, it can definitely go left or dark, very dark and negative without you trying to make it a negative thought, right? Like you can be trying to be as positive as you possibly can, right? I mean, what do they say? You speak it into existence, right? If I manifest it, it will come. So you can do all of the things trying to be a positive person. But without actually dissecting and disassociating through these steps, you're ultimately going to fail. And it's going to come out negative because it's just how you're hardwired. So more than likely, you won't even notice that it's happening, that the thought is becoming a negative output. That is until you start wondering why you're so angry or upset for an unknown reason, right? There's so many different environmental and situational factors that could have caused a negative thought to become attached as your diagonal run, right? That connects your two thought processes together. So I made the reference of the two connecting together because in my brain, and I guess it's me tunneling again, but the way that it works is in reproduction, so looking at a child or a baby or a reproduction of any kind of animal or being, you have one cell that becomes two, and then they split, and then they split, and then they split, and they're doubling each and every time they split, right? That's called growth. Well, in my brain, I group this into two straight runs being diagonally connected by those thoughts of tunneling because it just makes sense in a reproduction standpoint. So you know that if two of them are interconnecting and connecting there, then you know that there's so many more multiplying at the same time, right? And maybe that might not make sense for you, but it does for me. But anyway, so you do have more than two thought processes going on at the same time, or at least I do. But I only referenced the two being diagonally connected so we could look at it on a smaller scale. Just know that it does not mean that I'm only talking about two thoughts actually being connected while you tunnel. So each one of these thoughts or these straight runs, they all happen at the same time, right? And they're all interconnected and tunneled by these diagonal connections. All it takes is one negative connection between one or two of your thought processes to trigger a downward spiral, right? For nothing but negative connections to follow. And I'm so serious. Y'all think about the game of Jenga. In Jenga, once you get down to it, almost falling, you have a chance to take out that one block, right? Well, if you take out that one block and it's no longer connected enough, the whole pile falls. So let's use that method to fix our negative thoughts, right? Now, here's where you gotta buckle up, Buttercup, because it's fixing to get even more interesting and complex, believe it or not. If I lost you at all anywhere in the previous sections of the podcast, please rewind, go back, re-listen, and hopefully understand where this is going. So, we're going to go ahead and use this method. Along with a previously referenced method, we've all used to survive. And look, I say that, I don't say that very lightly, but lightly enough that I don't speak for everybody, but I do know and understand, and I have studied that more often than not, we rely on the disassociation method to run from our thoughts, to numb ourselves, to distance ourselves from the situation, to move past it, but we're really just burying it, right? We're going to take this same skill that we use to survive, and we are going to use it to rebuild, grow, and thrive, okay? This is what I was talking about whenever I said you have to rekindle those survival techniques, right? Disassociation is actually one of the most critical methods that nobody teaches us, okay? Nobody teaches us how to use it. We just genetically, I guess we're hardwired to produce the disassociation method from our genetics, right? It just happens. We don't learn it. It just happens. So, everybody also teaches us that disassociation is bad. It's what makes you become numb. It's what makes you become distant. Contrary to the belief, though, it's really not. It's only perceived that way because we were never actually taught how to properly use disassociation. So, quick recap. Remember, the neurotypical mind does not disassociate, especially not by default like ours does, right? Neurotypical people, they do not distance themselves. They do not become numb. They don't struggle with these things, right? But this is why society has actually deemed disassociation as a bad trait or quality. Because we have it. We produce it, but we were never taught how to use it. So each one of these interconnecting diagonal connections between your two thoughts, between the straight runs, okay? If you harbor the disassociation and you disassociate that one negative thought in the beginning of that run, okay? At the very beginning, so at the top of the cast net, at the throat, if you have that first initial thought, right? And in that first initial thought, you go ahead and notice that a negative thought has now entered after the first initial thought. Okay? Well, for example, I'm going to give you a good example here so you can really understand what I'm trying to say. Let's think about the word lion. The first negative thought that pops into my head following the word lion is, well, it might eat me. Let's disassociate that, right? By replacing it with, it's just a big cat. Or I really like its mane. Or, they're a really good predator. Let's pause and reflect. As you can tell from the beginning of my efforts to replace and disassociate the negative thought, even with my years of doing this, it is still a process for me to find the best fitting words to replace the negative thought correctly. Because you can't just replace it with something off the wall and stupid. Because then it's not going to click in your brain and it's not going to stick, right? You're just wasting your energy. So just make sure you stay on that tunnel until you're able to correctly replace and disassociate it. Okay, so instead of saying it could eat me, I'm going to look at it from the flip side in saying they're a really good predator. So now we've replaced the negative thought with a positive thought, right? Let's go ahead and pause and recap again because we just covered quite a bit. But I'm actually stating, in case you didn't catch it, the same thing about the lion. However, by stating it positively rather than the negative side of the thought, I'm now looking at the association through another perspective. In other words, I'm looking at the link from the lion to the description or adjective of the thought in a positive view or mindset. So guys, all I did was take the thought, and I flipped it. And I'm now looking at it from this side instead of this side, right? So you just have to flip it around. Like I said, our brains are a little backwards for society these days. You just gotta turn it around. So in using this method of disassociation and breaking that first negative connection, it's like a domino effect. Y'all, this first step is so critical to the rest of any of your self-growth. It's really the brass tacks of how to grow. It's the absolute bottom line to understanding what makes you you. We're going to go ahead and move on. So now we've disassociated our first negative thought, right? Keep in mind, we've now changed how our webbing is interconnected between all of our thoughts. So in the grand scheme of things, you have now regenerated your webbing, aka your thoughts, how they're wired, and how they're carried out by what is put into them. This is the first step to being able to subconsciously and by first nature instincts show more of a positive side to your personality than you would a negative side. This is how you can decide who you want to be. This is where it all starts, y'all. This is how you dig deep and you find what makes you you. This is how you reconstruct who you want to be. This is how you find all of the beauty and charismatic nature to you. After you understand this method, you will unlock new opportunities or things that your brain is going to want to explore. I hope that I've done a good enough job explaining this. If I didn't, please reach out. I'm going to definitely try my best to keep the profanity at a minimum because I do want this podcast to also reach out to children. I do. I want to help all ages. However, I am who I am, and I'm very blunt and honest. Sometimes you just can't get the point across without some extra seasoning in the statement, right? But I'm now published across 40 plus streaming platforms for the audio only podcast to this channel. And if anybody wants to reach out to me to collaborate, feel free to do it. Again, my email will be inserted right here for your convenience. Please reach out. I would love to collaborate and hear your thoughts or opinions on the show. I love getting other people's points of views. I love understanding how I can better explain things to help everybody else understand. With hopes that I'll see you on the next episode. I am not saying goodbye. I'm saying I'll see you later. I hope y'all have a great day.